Hey everyone, and a massive welcome to the latest edition of the CISO Experience. My name's Simon Lindstedt, and I'm the host and founder of the InfoSec Live community. For those that don't know, InfoSec Live is a community of 3,000 cyber professionals, all sharing best ideas and practice in what I think is the world's first dedicated security social network. This show has been created to help further the sharing of best ideas and practice with our industry's leaders. And our community is free and offers tons of support to our members, which is only possible thanks to the support and our sponsor of today's event, Bramfit Technology Labs. So a bit about our sponsor before we start. Bramfit are an international cybersecurity consultancy that lead the way in innovation and cyber resilience. With their entire team being owner managed and working on a linear structure, it draws expertise from the military, government, finance and technology industries. And together they provide support and collaboration to those who protect company assets and sensitive data. Through research, education and execution, Bramfit helps to protect your systems and your reputation. And the quote from their CEO, Lewis Bramfit, if you're a CISO suffering from Big Four fatigue, reach out to Bramfit today to see how they can help. I will drop the link to Bramfit in the comments below, but without too much further ado, I'd like to do a quick intro for another amazing speaker we have on today. Kayne McGladrey, CISSP, is the cybersecurity strategist for Ascent Solutions, a senior member of the IEEE, and has over 2 decades of experience in cybersecurity, served as a CISO and advisory board member, and focuses on the policy, social, and economic effects of cybersecurity lapses to both individuals, companies, and of course, the nation. So very honored to have Kane as a speaker today, where we're going to be discussing a variety of topics, including some industry hiring practices, which is always popular, a bit of gatekeeping, burnout, and hopefully, if the crowd today is interactive, a live Q&A at the end. So without too much more rambling on my behalf, because I'm very good at that, I shall bring Kane on now. Hi, Kane.
Hi, Simon. Thanks for having me on the show today. This is exciting.
No, more importantly, thank you so much for giving up your time. I know how busy you are. So I've had the pleasure of having a chat with you before. For our audience who don't know who you are, would you mind giving everyone a bit of background before we start?
So I think the intro you gave me was pretty good. The only other things that I can say about myself is one of my goals is to disambiguate, and I recognize that's a big word, but to speak plainly about cybersecurity wherever feasible and to really make it as accessible as possible. And I think that we as cybersecurity professionals really need to begin a new dialogue. We need to be far more intentional with our communications with anyone who's outside of the industry, and that's something that I try to bring to every conversation.
Let's focus on that as a starting point, because it's a crucially important aspect of the industry. And from many of the CISOs I've spoken to, there seems to have been a shift in change of, I suppose, skill sets required, perhaps, or the perception of skill sets required, especially when it comes to dealing with the boardroom and perhaps also when dealing with some customer facing parts of the job as well, which I see more and more CISOs being brought into. And that obviously links back with what you've said about, I suppose, changing the narrative or the way the narrative is placed. Can you expand on that a bit more, Kane?
Absolutely. So I think that CISOs who came up from a technical background, people who, and goodness knows our industry is, we are a great representative example of the Peter Principle, where people fail to the level of their incompetence and then are recognized for that, where we take incredibly technical people who are very good at, I don't know, security operations, or maybe they're good at identity and access management, or maybe they're good at DFIR or whatever, right? And we say, you're really good at that. Let's put you in a management role, because that makes all the sense in the world, right? Let's take people who are really technical and put them in a non-technical role and expect them to succeed, and then to go to a board meeting and they're thinking, you know what, zero trust is the thing I need to push to my board. They need to understand the value. The board doesn't care about zero trust. They're not interested. It's a buzzword. Goodness knows, if you were at RSA, everything is zero trust XDR. You could get a sticker with that on, or a beanie baby, right?
Kane, don't forget though, I wasn't RSA, and we've got shift left there as well. If it wasn't zero trust, it was shift
I know,
left.
right? We've got this insular language that we're using that, depending on who you're talking to, either they're hearing buzzwords that they saw out of some Gartner or Forrester report, or they're not interested because it sounds like some technology, 3-letter acronym that's incomprehensible, or it's not meeting their expectations. and this goes across the board. I think of Jan Easterly, the head of CISO's comments just, I think it was yesterday or today in the Washington Post, where she's trying to change the narrative to be about data care, kind of how we talk about healthcare, because that makes it more accessible for individuals from underrepresented communities in cybersecurity, which I think if we can bring in those diverse ways of talking about this challenge, and if we can bring in an alternate approach, sure, we're still going to need the folks who, if you're doing DFIR all day, defense, if you're doing incident response all day, ultimately you are going to use a high degree of technical language, right? But if you're talking to somebody in marketing, or if you're talking to your kids about why they should have multi-factor authentication on their mobile, it's a very different conversation, and you have to be able to scale that up and down.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I just want to make a quick clarification point. I see Gutam in the chat has said that zero trust is important in InfoSec. And Gutam, I completely agree with you. It is super important. I think the point we were getting towards was it isn't so much the word zero trust that are important, but the fundamentals behind it that could perhaps be explained in a different way, Kane.
Yeah, we need to talk about risk more than anything else. If you're having a board level conversation, you are having a conversation about risk, period, point blank, because most boards, and I think this is despite recent regulatory changes in both the EU and the United States to try and force boards to have some representation of cybersecurity expertise on them, until that goes through for board composition, they're having a conversation about risk, period, point blank, drop the buzzwords, they will laugh you out the door, or they'll just completely shut up and ignore you and go find themselves another CISO who speaks their language. That's even if you have that opportunity. Now, when we're talking to our staff, when we're talking to those people who we support inside of the business, depends, right? The accounting department does not care about zero trust. They care that they can do accounting and that they have a good, efficient way of doing that. And by the way, if they, get prompted because they're logging in at a weird hour from home, something you can sell them on through an adoption and change management process. If you're talking, however, to your, if you're talking to your security operations team, yeah, you should probably talk to them about zero trust. You should probably have that conversation very nuanced with them about how you're going to involve your maturity associated with zero trust. But it's who are you speaking to and what is their level of interest, and do they even have any background in the topic? And the other thing also, just to cover down zero trust finally, if there is a vendor listening on the call, please, please, please stop using the term in your marketing materials. It's killing us all. It is really not helpful for the industry, for everybody to have zero trust, XDR, shift left, everything. Here's the thing, zero trust, the Biden administration in the United States told via executive order all federal agencies last year, you're doing zero trust. That's it, you're doing zero trust. This year, we're actually seeing agencies that previously didn't have a SIM, a security incident event system, right? They didn't have those, they're standing them up. First of all, it's kind of scary that they didn't have a SIM for telemetry, and second of all, good on them. Right, but this means zero trust is now table stakes. It's no longer interesting. It is our new normal. We need to stop making it a marketing term.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, I've mentioned the whole debate about the size of the marketing budgets and how much they're pushing the narrative in this industry, I think, on every one of these episodes so far. And it seems to be a massively common frustration for all CISOs out there. So it's nice to hear that reaffirmed. One of the other things you mentioned the Biden administration wasn't going to talk politics, and I'm not going to, but I did notice in the news, I think it was yesterday, that the White House made an announcement about upskilling in cybersecurity. Did you see that?
I did, and it's another one of these workforce development opportunities where they're trying to address the labor shortfall, or the, I think more appropriately phrased, perceived labor shortfall that we have inside of cybersecurity.
Yeah, absolutely. So perhaps I can say this and you can't. Perhaps I don't live in the US. Maybe it's not addressing the root problems from what I've seen. I mean, I've only given it a quick glance, but again, it seems to be looking at a kind of quick fix of training people up over I think it was 120-day period, which again, in my opinion, isn't addressing the whole industry issues that we've got, rather just trying to stick a plaster over one for the moment. I'll stop rambling and come back to the chat because we've had quite a few people jump in. Got some random ones.
Just double down on that one.
Carry
real
on.
quick, Simon. So I would say that I think there's merit in the various initiatives to bring people into cybersecurity. There was a recent industry report I read, and it was about 85% of the folks who are coming into cybersecurity roles, at least in the private sector, not in the public sector, as with Biden administration. They're moving in from previous non-cyber roles. Now, some of
Yeah,
those might be IT roles. I think that they are overly but I think until we start getting different opinions, until we get somebody who's coming from a police officer background, somebody who's coming from an Air Force background, somebody who's coming from a music background, somebody who's coming from a liberal arts background, until we start getting their views into the cybersecurity industry, we're applying the same solutions to
yeah,
evolving problems, and we're getting the same result, which is, the effect of essentially like money moving from Western nations predominantly to Eastern nations predominantly that don't
yeah,
have extradition treaties.
yeah. Absolutely that. I think let me just jump back into the chat. I've just missed a
Sure.
couple. They're coming in so quick here. Kane, hold on one second. So, Robert, it's a random one, but I will ask it. Do you do pen tests? If so, do you let your analysts know that it's happening, or let them join in? So, I suppose
Um,
this is a red-purple debate, is it, Robert?
Fair enough. Yeah, yeah. So speaking, let's see. I can't say my behalf. I mean, it's been a long time since I've done a pen test. We used to call it a tiger team back in the day. Ascent Solutions, however, does do pen tests, and ultimately the question becomes not if you let the analysts know if they're doing it. It's what are the rules of engagement overall, right? What are the operators of the pen test or the vulnerability assessment or a crown jewels hunt? What are they allowed to do and what are they not allowed to do contractually? And I
Yeah,
think any good pen test firm that does this gets that in writing and gets it up front to set expectations. And then if you are on the blue team, um, I think the value of a good pen test or a crown jewels hunt, which tends to be a far more invasive, dedicated force trying to specifically go after an assigned objective. Um, I think the most effective ones, the blue team doesn't know, right? They're not aware. It's just something that's happening in the environment because the purpose is to figure out, uh, does the existing telemetry catch it? Do our existing processes catch it? Like, where is the weakness in the system that can be exploited by a dedicated actor?
yeah, absolutely. That I think Robert, expanding on that a little bit, moving away from the pen test, having that embedded security culture where you've got red and blue working together on an ongoing basis. From what I've seen in my limited time in the industry, can be invaluable. But again, it's expensive. It only fits for certain firms who can perhaps afford that at this moment. And I think, Kane, going back to the shock about how many firms didn't have that kind of security infrastructure in place, as we drop down and start looking in the SME sector, it's an absolute horror story there, I think.
I think so. In a lot of cases, the pen test is a regulatory requirement, the box
Yeah,
exercise. It's that we did a pen test, and I've seen these where in the SMB space, somebody fires up Burp Suite. They run Burp Suite against Burp Suite is Portswigger.
yeah,
They have an open source version. They literally will run an open source tool against the public website. The auditor doesn't know what a proper pen test result looks like. They go, oh, cover sheet. I've seen one of these cover sheets before. That's right. And we all massage our temples and go, oh, this is not the world we wanted.
yeah. I think it's again going off tangent a little bit, but you speak to a good example. Okay, so a firm decides at a high level that they're going to migrate everything to the cloud. Brilliant
Mhm.
idea, excellent. Then what happens after they've outsourced that to a third party company? When it actually comes to it, once it's embedded in, they don't have any staff trained for it. There's no real resources available to fix it, and it seems to be. Do you think that's driven again by the marketing noise that we see, or just bad advice?
So I think that's a multifactorial issue as everyone's trying to do Industry 4.0 or digital transformation, or honest to goodness, there was an event a couple years ago, a bit of a pandemic situation that unfortunately still seems to keep dragging on and colors every conversation, where firms were ultimately forced to migrate to the cloud, not necessarily because they thought it was a good idea, but because they realized that having the old castle and moat model, where all of your people went to the building, and because they were in the magical building with the magical firewall, that nothing bad would happen. Turned out that didn't work. Didn't work before the pandemic forced the issue, certainly does not work today. So there was a lot of rapid migration to the cloud. And what I find in my conversations with clients is not just about security, it's about a lack of governance control. Like, all the cloud providers right now have governance controls that will allow you to establish data residency. If you have that as a requirement, for example, in the European Union or in the United Kingdom, or for that matter in the United States. And if you've got data residency laws that you have to abide by, they're not just a good idea, right? You can't have your developers spinning up like an Amazon instance or an Azure instance of a server and storing data outside of your region. Well, all of the providers, they have those controls.
Yeah.
I've talked to so many clients who go, wait, that exists? They don't even know that the control exists. And then you get into the cybersecurity associated with it. And I think you are right. There is a massive skills gap between the organizations that understand what a VLAN is, right?
Yeah.
Because they can go, oh, I know what that is. That's on my premises. I totally get that. But you can talk to them about network security groups on Azure, and they're like, what now? Sorry, it's the same concept. But because we've come up with a new term, because goodness knows our industry loves making new terms for things, all of a sudden it's new and it's different, and nobody needs, you need ultimately Rosetta Stone between the folks who are working on premises and the folks who are working in the cloud to have that conversation.
Absolutely. Now, look, we've talked about a few different things off topic, and I'm going to stay off topic a little bit because we were talking about buzzwords. You mentioned RSA. We were talking about zero trust being everywhere. The other buzzword that I see everywhere is shift left. And seeing as you've just mentioned the developer word, let's jump on that for a moment. The comment I would have is, are we shifting far enough left with the marketing we're seeing, Kane?
So when I think of shift left, I think of DevSecOps. I just want to cover down. We're okay, good. You're nodding. Wanted to confirm we're talking about DevSecOps. And I think the challenge that we have in organizations is it really speaks to the development culture more than anything else. It's not a technology issue. Goodness knows, before shift left was a thing, we had code inspection tools. We had both dynamic code inspection tools, and we had static code inspection tools. And we even had ways of inspecting remote GitHub repositories that would say, hey, that code looks sus, right? That was a thing that we had beforehand. Then we called it DevSecOps, and we said, hey, we're going to put our secrets into the cloud, and we're going to put them into key management vaults or wherever we're going to store our secrets and our keys, right? And we're going to use secure coding. And I think that companies that came on after that was a thing, who are getting new graduates out of school who are learning these topics, and thank goodness they are, I think that's easier for them to adopt. Whereas if you've got a classic waterfall method associated, where you're not using user stories, but you've just got your classic, like, hey, we're going to do all of our requirements, and then we're going to do our use cases, and then, right, and eventually you get garbage code that falls out the bottom that probably fails and costs a whole bunch of that's going to be a hard shift. And it's not because there's not technology, it's because it's a people issue, right? And I think that's something that we struggle with in cybersecurity across all disciplines, is a people issue of trying to get people to understand, here's why this is beneficial for you, here's why it's beneficial for your career. I think a lot of people get that one, actually. And here's why it's beneficial for the organization. But until you can have that very nuanced conversation with them, they're just going to keep on doing what they're doing, because, you know, I think one of the challenges that developers, actually everybody, runs into is that if being secure, if doing things in the most secure fashion slows you down, come annual review time, or come whatever time you have the checkpoint with the management structure, supervisory structure, whatever, they're going to point where your productivity is down, right? If there's no acknowledgement that security is a requirement that might have an initial effect on your schedule, you're going to get knocked on that. And a lot of folks want to.
Yeah, no, thank you, Kane. That makes absolute sense. Going back to the recruitment piece we were talking about earlier, Johnny Gill, before we go on that, Johnny Gill made a comment about 100% right about the language when he was an IT manager, had to be able to communicate to typical users and management why things were good or bad. Now being a pen tester, he gets to do that with just other techies, which I think is another good point. And Robert jumped in the chat. He said, talking about the recruitment angle, I know Robert from the InfoSec Live community. He worked in recruitment 2 years ago, nothing to do with the security industry. And he's rapidly rising through the ranks, as are several other people I've seen over the last sort of 12 to 18 months. And you mentioned police force earlier, people transitioning from the military. It's a slow trickle, but we are seeing an uptake on non-industry types coming in. How do we encourage that? And how do we stop people from getting so downbeat about trying to get in? Because they're competing with, boot camps telling people they can do it in 12 weeks to magical, 100 grand a year for your first job figures, and the managing of expectations and the whole kind of, I suppose we could call it the gatekeeping part of the conversation. What needs to change there, Kane?
Oh dear.
Hold on, let me
everything. How's that for?
We're just
talking about everything. Yeah, exactly. So I think that there's a couple changes that have to happen, and none of them are easy. The first thing I think is that firms that are posting $15 an hour internship jobs that require you to have a CISSP and 10 years of InfoSec experience, and you have to have 15 years of Kali Linux, and by the way, you also have to have a Purple Heart. I think we should just burn those with fire. Like, just don't respond to those ads. Don't engage. Treat them as trolls on the internet. Forget them, because there is a certain marketing function here where those firms that have got HR professionals that have read, the top 10 list, it's probably, I'm sure BuzzFeed has this as a list, right? Top 10 things your InfoSec analyst needs, right? If they're basing that job description off of the perfect candidate, just ignore it. Don't go after those, right? I think that's the first thing. The second thing we need to really focus on is what is a good entry-level set of requirements. I think that if you've got a 2-year degree, right? Western and Washington College, as well as Whatcom Community College, just down the street from me, actually, funny enough, they have a 2-year degree, right? It's a cybersecurity degree. It's basic essential skills. I think if you take a 2-year degree that's analogous to that on cybersecurity, I think that's good if you want a entry-level cybersecurity role, because if you spend 4 or 6 or 8 years in school, your student loan debt is certainly going to go the heck up. We are delaying people from getting into the work field. Desperately need more people, and then I think the the net difference on salary is pretty marginal for a master's degree for an entry-level job. However, I think ISC Squared put out a survey last year, early this year, that showed if you have one certification, any certification, and I mean like a CompTIA Security Plus certification, right? That's an extra $33,000 in salary right out of the gate, right? So here we have a path to a middle-class job with a middle-class salary for entry level for folks who've take a 2-year degree. That's not got that bad of a student loan debt. You get yourself certification out of one of those 12-week boot camps. Done, right? At that point, you should be able to enter the workforce, assuming as professionals, we ignore all those job ads that are being written effectively by trolls. And then if you find yourself in a leadership position, if you find yourself as a CISO, or maybe you're in HR and I've already angered you, I do get a little bit salty about some job ads from HR that are exclusive. I think the other thing we need to do is, if you're in a leadership position, start making your job postings more accessible, right? I'm going to oversimplify here. Let's say there's just 2 genders, right? Let's just say there's just women and men, right? Because that's a study that I've read. If you look at the study, it shows that women are 24% of security professionals worldwide, right? That is less than 1/4. It's not a good statistic. And if you pull at the thread of, well, why is that? It's because it has been shown by multiple psychological studies that women will only apply to a job, mostly, that they check all the boxes for. So if you have 47 boxes that say you have to have all these things, and somebody who considers themselves female says, oh, they're not even going to apply. again, taking a
Yeah,
very simple gender
I've
parity here,
read the
saying
same.
men are
I've
going to
read
go,
the
ah,
same
screw it,
study.
I'm going to go for it, right? I'm just going to apply. And that's where we continue to see this gender imbalance, which is unfortunately leading a different conversation where at the top, women are 13% of security roles in the Fortune 500. And again, that changes the narrative. That changes our approach to cybersecurity issues from hiring to spending to response.
Brilliant. So we've talked about those maybe coming in from the degree angle, perhaps suited to those perhaps a lot younger than I. Let's focus at opportunities or ways in for people my age and a bit younger who've got perhaps an established previous career that they're either bored of or had enough of, and they want to try and pivot into cyber. Different path or same path, Kane?
You know, it's a similar, but it's a question as to whether or not your own firm is doing upskilling or not. And this is something that an increasing career option if you're at a company right now and you're happy with the company, but you're not happy with the work. Like, let's say you're working in manufacturing role, right? Maybe you're in a managerial role in manufacturing, you do productions and logistics, and you go, yeah, this isn't really scratching my itch anymore. I mean, I can show up and do it, but go have a conversation with the cybersecurity team. Just literally wander over to wherever they sit or get on Teams or Slack or whatever communications tool you have and start up a conversation and say, hey, what do y'all do? And even if that conversation goes nowhere, first of all, they will love you for that because folks in cybersecurity really love it when folks in business show up and ask questions because it shows that, hey, we're getting acknowledgement that this is a thing that we do. And everybody kind of likes that. But also, you can start building those relationships inside of your firm to find those career opportunities where they might have thought hire outside of the firm. And one of the hardest things to hire for is not technical skills, which, despite what I just said, the other part is cultural fit. Well, if you're already there, you've already got the cultural fit. So then it just comes down to the technologies, right? And if you're
Yeah.
already there, you're already working, and they're thinking about adding a position. Ask, well, what would I need to do to get into that position, right? Because it's a lot easier for most organizations to hire internally to do it via a job transfer. Now, the other alternative here is, let's say you're at a firm, same manufacturing person doing management, and they're bored out of their skull because it's not a lot of fun. And they're thinking, well, how do I transition into this role? I think the first thing to do is to get it something like cyberseek.org. Cyberseek.org, which lists all of the possible career paths for cybersecurity. You can look at the entry level ones and go, okay, what are the educational requirements for this? And then go find somebody who does that. My way of doing that, I tend to be fairly active on Twitter. Go find folks, if you're active on LinkedIn, on Facebook, whichever platform you happen to be on, go find somebody, ask, hey, can I ask you about your job? Like, what do you do? What's your
Yeah.
day job like? What's your work shift like? What do you like about it? What do you hate about that? And I say that, go talk to people who are in something that sounds interesting to you before you go after the education, because you might go, geez, wow, everybody says pen testing is cool, right? And then you turn out you're like me and you absolutely hate puzzles,
Yeah.
right? Pen testing is puzzle solving. I am garbage. You put
I mean, Kane, I think
puzzle in front of me, it is a train wreck. But go talk to those individuals, find out what they love about their job, right? That then gives you the direction. Do I pursue this further?
yeah, no, absolutely. There's loads and loads of people jumping in the chat. I just want to say, I think this is one of the busiest ones we've had so far. So a massive thank you, well, to you, Kane, for drawing in the audience, and to the audience for being here as well. There's lots of comments about the importance of networking. Robert made the comment that it wasn't certificates for him; it was self-study, being able to demonstrate
Mhm.
what he'd learned, and again, networking. And I suppose, whilst it isn't a sales pitch, because the InfoSec Live community is free, if you're looking to network with people who are in the industry, there's nearly 3,000 of us in there, ranging from CISOs, to entry-level SOC analysts. And what Kane said about making sure the job's right for you, I mean, for those who've heard my story before, I won't bore you with it again, but I wanted to be a pen tester until I realized how hard it was, how rubbish I was at it, and how much reporting was involved, which is my idea of hell. So again, aligning your skills, and not just your skills, what you enjoy doing, to any potential role, I think is massively important.
I want to cover one other thing from Robert's point around certifications there, and already from being super interactive in this, that I love this. This is as close to a live audience as I've gotten in a while. Thank you, COVID, for that. The trick with certifications. Certifications, again, first of all, ISC squared study, $33,000 on your first job for your first certification that you get. Beyond that, the ability to demonstrate that you have the skills is often more important than actually having the certificate. Like a lot of cases, certification helps you get a job. It doesn't necessarily help you do a job, and there's regrettably studies that back that up.
Yeah.
So I think what really becomes important is, let's say you're working in a Microsoft environment, you know you're going to be going on a security path in there. Certainly go look at something like an MS500, but unless you're specifically trying to get a job doing that, go learn the skills, right? Because by the time you get that certificate, or maybe you want to become a pen tester, kind of like you did, Simon. Maybe you want to hacker, your CEH, right? Go learn that skill set first. But because the skills tend to be in the highly technical fields, they tend to be fairly dynamic and get updated on a regular basis. The trick with certifications is once you get it, you have to maintain it. And so for those technical certifications, you're getting on a treadmill. And it has to be a conscious choice. Do I like this treadmill or not? Now, by comparison, if you're getting a certification like a CISSP or like a CIRA audit one, right? By comparison, those tend to be fairly business level. It's you get it and you do it, and you then provided you show continuing education credits, which is show up at chats like this actually. You can claim those credits and go, okay, hey, I'm checking the box because it's not so technical, but it is very managerial focused.
That's another good point. And Williams just made a good comment here. Although I've put it on the screen and my eyesight being nearly 50, I can't read it. So excuse how close I get. Certifications can be costly to maintain, CPEs, renewal fees, etc. What are your thoughts on retaining earlier certifications after you've earned higher certifications? It's a good point.
You know, I speaking from my own personal experience, I didn't bother. But it's really a question of what do you want to do with yourself, right? If you were working hardcore, hands-on technical work all day long, you probably can sleep your way through a certification, right? If whatever technology you're working with, if you're working with your familiar tech stack and the vendor has come up with, you know, version 8.0 of their certification for this year, you're going to snooze your way through the exam. Maybe your employer will even cover it for that because they get some prestige in their marketing or in their partnership with that vendor or that certification entity. That's not necessarily a bad thing. If, on the other hand, you're saying, you know what, I want to go more towards an architect track or more towards a advisory track or more towards a managerial track, once you get out of hands-on stuff, you find that those exams become materially harder anyway. But that's not what you're getting paid to do, right? If you are in a management role or if you're in an architect role, nobody is asking you to fire up a command prompt or PowerShell or to bang code out anymore, to fire up Nessus anymore, right? They're asking you to either oversee that work or better yet to spec that work or better yet to forecast the outcomes of that work and come up with a roadmap to say, how do we resolve the issues found? Because you've got that foundational understanding of all the technical bits that led you to that point in your career.
Absolutely. Big shout out to KevTech in the audience. KevTech, I don't know if you know him, Kane. He's got lots and lots of subscribers, can't say it, on YouTube and LinkedIn, and he's helped hundreds, if not thousands of people break into the IT industry by giving away free training. And his point is certifications will help you get past the ATS system and help with getting the job interview. It shows hiring managers that you're willing to learn a new technology, which I think, you know, both relevant points. A little bit cynical there, KevTech, because I think we've seen some of the practices out there, but that ATS system can be a killer, I think.
I think you're absolutely right. And again, that comes down to my earlier comment of let's burn some of those job ads with fire, right? If it looks like it's going to have a stupid number of requirements, and if it's written also to their current technology stack, well, there's two things. First of all, if you're a job applicant, go ignore that one. Second of all, if you're doing open source intelligence or if you're trying to figure out the best way to do pen testing against organizations, go look at their job ads. And I say that because some of the job ads will have their specific technology stack in it. And if like you want to know what to go attack, cool, they've got version numbers in there. Let's go check CVEs against that. Let's roll against that, as opposed to like, let's do a scan. No, if they're giving away the information for free, go collect it.
Sorry, I've just got to stop laughing, Kane. I've never thought about that before, but it's absolutely crazy now you've said it, isn't it? Look, we've been going on about that for some time. I'm conscious of your time. KevTech has made one more comment though. The job requirements drive me crazy. They ask for a unicorn when it's entry level. Yeah, completely agree. And that's back to Kane's point, I think, about them needing to be burnt. I know we've mentioned the word burnt quite a few times today already. So while we're on that, tedious link to our next topic, which is burnout. Or for those that know my story, break down. And that's what can happen if you don't take time out and appreciate your mental health in any industry. However, the burnout rate in this industry is something that I've never seen before. Going back to Kane's comments about different surveys, I think we've all seen the data about the expected burnout and people handing in their jobs in this industry. Let's talk about that, Kane. What's your thoughts on that?
So I think there's a couple, two or three touch points that I keep in mind. First one is presenteeism. And I think that, there's a study I saw that 61% in cybersecurity were saying there was that culture of presenteeism where they were staying longer and working longer hours than they needed to. And that resulted in, the overwhelming majority of cybersecurity professionals are saying, hey, they work way more than 40 hours a week. And then you take that and say, well, okay, so there was a study again of folks who work in cybersecurity, and almost 3/4 said burned out colleagues were quitting. Right. So that goes to your point. I think
Yeah.
that organizations need to look at the mental well-being and the job life balance of cybersecurity professionals. And that's whether they are a new person to our industry, somebody who is entry level, who is just following a checklist, right? If all you're doing is SOC analyst one, if it's go investigate all of the alerts that pop up because you haven't automated those yet or rolling yet, or artificial intelligence or ML, whatever the buzzword today happens to be. But if you've just literally got somebody doing checklists, check in with that person, see, how you doing? You good? How long are they working? Like, what's their mood? How are they feeling? And then I think if we go all the way up to the CISO, where we're seeing increased burnout there,
Yeah.
as well as drugs, medication, and people like actually seeking therapy, which I think that's great that they're doing
Yeah.
that as opposed to the other alternatives. We also need to look at the mental care there, because the reality of the industry right now, the ocean is going to wash over your desk every day. You are going to drown every day, right? And if we're not giving people the skills to manage that expectation, that yeah, you know what, not every day is going to be a great day. Some days are going to suck. Actually, I
Yeah.
think that's a necessary attitude to take. But also, I will say this: if we look at individuals who are coming into the other jobs, this is indoor work. There's no heavy lifting involved, right?
Yeah.
And the worst thing that happens is you get yelled at. Nobody's going to shoot you. You're not going to lose a limb. So I think there's some selling points there around the
Yeah.
type of the work, and that it's relatively safe. You might have some emotional scarring depending on the culture that you go work with. And that then comes to a cultural question of, are we showing that we respect our people? Are we showing enough love to our people? Are we actually taking care of our people, or are we not? What are the expectations there? And I think for some companies, workforce development probably comes down to what are our key skills, and what's a business strategy for us, and what is something that we should actually outsource, right? I think the growth of the MDR, XDR, so managed detection response, extended detection response industry, is because these have said, look, we are going to put people on a SOC for eyes on glass for 3 8-hour shifts, and they can't hire enough people. Let's force that out to an XDR provider or an MDR provider, because they can't hire enough folks, or they've seen what it does to folks, right? I
Yeah.
think that if you're, however, running an XDR MDR solution by comparison, please do take good care of your folks and make sure like that they're getting enough time off. There are actually companies out there that are forcing, like we've got this idea, the latest hotness in the United States at least is unlimited PTO,
Yeah.
unlimited paid time off, where consequentially nobody takes time off because there's no built-in incentive. Like back in the I don't know, pre 2010, I think was yeah, 2010 is about when unlimited PTO started really rolling up. People would be told, look, use it or lose it, right? You're going to have a maximum cap of 3 weeks of PTO, and if you don't use it, you're going to lose it. That would actually was a forcing function. I think now HR organizations have really over rotate into that and say, okay, wait a second, let's force people, let's require people to take some time away from work, because otherwise the stress becomes overwhelming.
Yeah, or I mean, they could just change it around completely. So people work differently. So you still get the same vacation time each year, but every single person who works for any organization has to have a break at a certain period after a certain amount of days. I mean, for me, that should be instigated in law and should have been a long time ago. There's loads of people jumping in the chat. One of the funniest comments when we were talking about the industry's not that bad, you know, you don't get your leg blown off. Roy put, inside equals air conditioning, count me in, which I thought was brilliant. Considering we've seen 40-degree temperatures in the UK last week, I'm with you on that, Roy. And KevTech's also put, companies need to take care of their employees. No one's a robot. And that's why he tells people to find the right company. And that was going to be my point on there. You mentioned culture. Toxic culture and toxic work environment is not something that anyone should put up with. And I think, again, that's a big part of the research that you have to do before joining a company. I've certainly turned jobs down, even as recently as last year, due to, after doing a bit of research, I've thought there's no way I'm putting my head on the block for that. And money isn't worth it. And again, I suppose the next point would be going back to making sure that your understanding of what the job is, of what you're going into. So does it align with what you want to do? Are you going to be happy doing it? And then the final comment from me would be, just because one job title gives you this much responsibility and these jobs to do, that same job title at any different firm could mean a million different things, because it depends on the size of the firm, the structure on the firm, how many hats you're going to have to wear, what you're going to have to do. So I'll stop rambling and let you talk again now, Kane.
Well, I think that you've got a good point, multiple good points there, actually. I think that interviewing the firm that you're going to join is just as important as them interviewing you to find out how they behave culturally. I also wanted to just rotate back on a strategy for those business leaders who are on the call and thinking about how, why, where do we put those forced breaks in the banking industry, which is a highly regulated industry. Something that is very common as an audit function is people are forced to not work their job and somebody else works it for a period of time. And the reason that they do that is it's pretty easy to catch deliberate malfeasance and insider risk. If somebody else is going to open up all of your things and pick up your work where you left off, they're going to find those errors and omissions. I think that in cybersecurity, that is an opportunity for firms that want to take a slightly longer view and say, look, if we rotate somebody into an unfamiliar job, an aligned job that they have the skills, and that person either rotates out and does that other person's job, or better yet, they take holiday for that period of time, it's going to find process optimization, right? If you have an audit requirement, or if we find ourselves living in a world where that becomes a regulatory requirement, you're already built for that, but it does give that ability for folks to take holiday, and you can sell it to your board. It's like, hey, you know, we're managing our insider risk against our most privileged individuals in the SOC or in the SecOps team. And just going back to hiring again there, I think that when folks are interviewing companies to join, ask folks about their work-life balance more than anything else. Like, just, you know, how's it go? Like, what's your day like? Do you feel like you've got like, what do you do outside of work? And for the folks who struggle or go outside of work, wait, maybe back up. That might not be the right firm to join.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you've got to be careful as well with websites like Glassdoor, which can give, you know, a valuable insight into a company. However, my only comment on believing everything you read is look for consistent comments from different people, because all it takes is one disgruntled employee to jump on there and put a bad review on, and it can ruin everything for everyone. But I've certainly seen some really poor demonstrations of company culture from reviewing Glassdoor, where you're seeing multiple comments the same. And I think as soon as you see something like that, it's time to be moved away from, definitely. Aaron's jumped in the chat. Hey, Aaron, how are you? Great to see you, my co-host of InfoSec Live. Glad you could be here today. You've mentioned audits. Audits, where we need to be done by outside parties. Completely agree that, like financial audits, a cybersecurity audit by an outside party is 100% necessary. So we haven't touched on that, but this is the marking your own homework debate, I think, Kane.
I think that it really depends on a couple factors, and they're both not exciting, but it's either going to be regulatory in nature or it's going to be, and this is the new one, insurance in nature. Insurance that I'm like, oh, that sounds like it's going to be super fun to talk about. So if you are working in a regulated industry, whatever it happens to be, you could be in healthcare, you could be in banking, you could be in defense industrial base, you could be doing manufacturing or assembly. In all of those cases, there are now requirements to have external third-party auditors come in and do an audit of your operations to see, how are you doing? The reason we got these, the funny thing is that I don't like all of the audits are functionally trying to achieve the same thing. And it's to achieve gaps that we had 10 years ago, right? The reason we had PCI show up, PCI DSS, is because of failures 10 years prior that forced us to have PCI DSS and say, you know what, maybe we shouldn't keep all those credit cards around. All of the current cybersecurity issues that we're having in probably 5 to 10 years from now, we're going to see regulatory structures or legal structures that say, you have to do this because we learned from our mistakes and nobody went and did it. The interest on external audits that we're seeing now is less regulatory in nature. It's that cyber insurance brokers are offering, so far it's an offer, it's not a requirement to conduct an audit of your environment. And I think that's going to be a really interesting dynamic to watch because when cyber insurance first came out, they were willing to underwrite anything. They're like, oh, you want $1 million cybersecurity insurance? How about a buck? That sounds cool. Go back, like nobody was buying cyber insurance 10 years ago. 5 years ago, started coming up, and then the ransomware threat actors went, wait a second, this seems like a profit. This seems like a money-making opportunity. And as a consequence, we started seeing cyber insurance professionals require forms to say you have these specific controls in place. And now we're seeing the offer that they're going to send in a team to interview you as part of an audit to prepare to get a lower premium on your cyber insurance. I think the trick there, you decide to take that offer, and it's not necessarily a bad offer, but either conduct an internal audit or have an external audit prepare you for that. Because if they find material gaps, that's going to affect your either your policy renewal rate, or you might get a policy exclusion that says, you know what, you don't have multi-factor authentication enabled. You don't have behavioral analysis of your end users to check for things like an impossible travel scenario. So you're probably going to have like access credentials stolen quite quickly. So we're not going to give you a policy that covers down on that. I think that's going to be the dynamic to watch for the next couple of years associated with cyber insurance because of the innovation in the threat actor space.
And it is such an immature market still. I mean, you hit the nail on the head back in when, 10 years ago, where it was you could get $1 to cover you for whatever. I think the insurance industry have been through a massive learning curve. Having worked in the insurance industry for 20 years, I can assure you of one thing: the more they become aware of the market and the more they become aware of areas where they cannot pay out by giving you those exclusions, the more that will increase. And unfortunately, I think this now leads to the point where we need to get professional advice on what insurance to get. I don't sell insurance, by the way. That's just a personal opinion, because I think that it's getting so confused and muddled, a bit like the products. I mean, the CISO I spoke to yesterday, I won't name his name because I'm going to release the show next week, but he said, I think there's 3,500 products out there in the market at the moment. They probably do about 10 things between them, but they all pretend they do something completely different. So I think, again, it's that part in a young industry, isn't it, where you've got loads of stuff going on everywhere, and we'll see at some point over the next few years where that starts to thin down, I think.
I think so. I think also Lloyd's and AIG put out guidance earlier this year, and this was around the war clause in cyber insurance policies that basically says if something is an act of war, it's not going to be covered. And the definition of an active war is starting to get really spicy at the moment, because if an overseas threat actor has been privateered by their government to go do ransomware against you because it brings new money into their economy, is it an act of war? So Lloyd's and AIG were like, you know what, y'all should consider backing out of this market for a bit because it's becoming a problem. Or alternatively, you need to cover down very carefully, because there was jurisprudence out of a court in New Jersey earlier this year where the judge literally read the dictionary to the insurance company about the definition of active war and said, look, y'all had a time to change this. You didn't change it. You were going to pay, I think it was a pharmaceutical concern that was claiming insurance on the active war because a nation state actor had attacked their organization as part of a ransomware attack. What that leads to, though, is we've got, as you say, this continued muddling of the insurance space where the actuarial tables are still hot garbage. They're improving, but the insurance companies, they're not running charities. They are looking to find those exclusions, deny coverage or to limit coverage. But at the same time, we have a for-profit industry, being the threat actor economy, that is looking at the developments in the cyber insurance industry and saying, okay, what are the policy exceptions? Who actually holds a policy that can pay out? What is their specifically policy language? There was that
Yeah.
Excellion bug last year where threat actors were able to roll against Excellions, file storage, download people's insurance policies, go ransomware all of those organizations, and then finish up with, put the bow on, ransomware the insurance company, right?
Yeah.
Because they knew this is a guaranteed way to get paid out.
I think that the worst nightmare is, yeah, people hacking the insurance companies and getting the database of everyone insured. Then it's just going to be like a feeding frenzy at the zoo, isn't it?
It has happened before. It will happen again, unfortunately.
I'm conscious we've got a few minutes left. Let's bring in a couple of more questions from the audience. So 100 Henry, I'm sure that's not your real name, but hopefully it's Henry. Kane, what personal qualities would you have to gain or have to become successful in a very competitive industry like cybersecurity?
So I think you need to have a willingness to learn continuously. I think you need to have a sense of humility. You're not going to always be right. You're not always going to be the smartest person in the room. And things aren't always going to go your way. And more than that, I think that something that really embodies cybersecurity is the desire to protect others. And that could be your
Yeah.
family, that could be your community, that could be your company, that could be your entire nation, depending. But I think that you need to have that service mentality, that you're not here because the technology is cool. You're not here because you're super smart. You're not here necessarily because the pay is good and there's air conditioning, but rather because you have to have that other calling that says work against insurmountable odds that are going to continuously innovate to make my life miserable. Hi there, threat actors. Right, that's what they do. And you have to say, you know what? That sounds like a good idea. It sounds like something I want to do because I find meaning in doing that.
Yeah, no, I think you see, that's it. I spent 20 years in a career that I had no interest in. I was helping rich people get richer. It wasn't giving me any sense of value whatsoever. And I think you could argue whether or not I'm giving any value now. But in my mind, what I'm doing now brings me joy because I'm getting to do two things. I'm getting to learn from people like yourself on a daily basis. And I'm getting to just stand here and talk at people, which is clearly what I've wanted to do for most of my life.
And that's important, right? It brings you
Yeah,
joy. It's
it
something
is.
that you find meaning in, and I think that's something that it really does have to resonate in cybersecurity, as with any job, right? It has to be
Yeah,
meaningful. You have to like the folks that you work with.
it does. Oh, absolutely that. And I think, Aaron, your point's an excellent one as well. The ability to network and learn. I think it's that constant that or the hunger to learn, isn't it? Having, as Kane said, that interest or that desire to learn, and then the ability to network. And we hear this all the time. You know, there's lots of introverted people in this industry, and I've had people say to me, "It's all right for you. You're good at this." Well, the only reason I suppose you could say I'm good at this is because I've been practicing for years, and I think even if you're an introverted person, you can still practice enough on those soft and essential skills to help you get up the next level. And it's no different than, you know, when you're building up your array of certifications and qualifications. I think soft and essential skills, negotiation skills, active listening, empathetic listening, they should be as important on that board of topics that you're learning. That's my humble opinion.
I think you're right. I also think there needs a conscious exception made for folks who are neurodiverse, because our
Yes.
industry attracts quite a lot of talent that is diverse in their way of thinking. And if we are to serve that community well, and if we are to bring them into the conversation, they need to have either the ability to do an interview in a means and to do their job in a means that they find to be acceptable and comforting, that allows them to be a productive member of a team. I think that probably where we're going to see that first is going to be in public institutions more than in private institutions, because they typically have that imperative as part of a good public governance and policy, is to make sure that we do have that diversity representation. I think companies can eventually work to get there. I think larger companies, it's probably quite a lot easier to acknowledge
Yeah,
that, hey, somebody
absolutely.
on the spectrum has very different interview requirements and very different job requirements.
100%.
We need to bring those folks in. We would be doing our industry a grave disservice by ignoring their needs.
I think you've hit the nail right on the head for me with regards to the whole recruitment process being broken with regards to neurodiversity. So I'm neurodiverse, but I've got ADHD, which brings its own challenges and its own superpowers, as does other areas of neurodiversity. However, an interview for me, which would be face to face, is relevant. Where an interview for someone whose job is not speaking to anyone on a daily basis, why are you putting them through a process that bears no relevance to what they're going to be doing on a day-to-day basis, makes them feel uncomfortable for no reason? That seems to be that's the main part we need to address. You know, people keep saying, "Oh, we should change it so all CVs or resumes are video resumes." Well, that's great for people who like the sound of their own voice, but what about people who hate that?
I think that's horrifying myself. I think that resume blinding is something we need to promote heavily. And the reason that I say that is because just somebody's name, and this is an unfortunate truth, somebody's name can be a racial marker, and people can consciously and subconsciously form, because of bias, they can exclude candidates and something as simple as their name or something as simple as their address, right? I think that we need to have, at least for initial intake of candidates, there needs to be resume blinding. And then the
Yeah,
ability that if somebody, at least in the United States, you fill out a disability form when you're applying for a job. If somebody indicates that they've got a disability, let's respect that. Let's, as you say, let's work through a different interview process so that we can bring
yeah,
them into the industry, as opposed as to making them feel uncomfortable or forcing them into a different line of work.
yeah, 100% that. And I think there is no skills shortage or skills gap. It's that the lack of being able to identify those people who are good for the role, because they keep getting missed all the time. That's my opinion on the hiring practices. I know I've just one comment. Raven, thank you very much for this. You're saying, I'm beginning to realize how valuable the CISO experience is. You can learn so much, and that is exactly what this is meant to be about, sharing those best ideas and practice. um Last 2 minutes we've got. Let's do a roundup then. So we've talked about lots of things: industry hiring practices, gatekeeping, burnout, insurance. We've done the Q&A all the way through, which has been brilliant. And thank you for that, audience. It's been amazing. Out of all those issues, what is our biggest challenge as an industry moving forward for the next 5 years, Kane, in your opinion?
I think it's the perceived skills gap. I think that that's the thing, that's the narrative we need to work towards changing, in that there's not a skills gap. There is a gap between the skills that companies are hiring for, and using that as gatekeeping to exclude individuals who are talented, who are motivated, who want to work. I think that the employers who are on this call, the individuals who are in a managerial role or in an HR role or some role where they can influence it, the takeaway message is to open up your recruiting processes to see what other candidates apply. If you make your job less exclusionary, if you use resume blinding techniques, if you are more open to non-traditional candidates joining the workforce, if you're actually upskilling inside of your organization, where people who might not come from an IT background say, hey, you know what, I've heard about cybersecurity, I want to get into it, right? I think that's the way we start to shrink this perception gap
Yeah,
between what a good cybersecurity professional is and how many folks actually want to work in the field. I think the other part of it is public institutions, private institutions really need to lean into the message that, look, this is a good middle class about protecting people. It's about protecting your family, your community. It's about your company, your nation, your neighbors, right? That is the other message that we need to really layer into this conversation, because until we do, we're going to continue, we're doing the same thing, we're expecting a different results, right? That is the definition of insanity.
Absolutely. I know all about that. I've been there briefly once a few years back, and it's not a good place to be. Or is that Bedlam? Similar place. So just one I haven't really, by the way, that's a joke. One quick comment. I see that one of the top pen testers at Bramfit Technology Labs, Johnny Gill, is in the audience. And this is a really good point that I want to finish on. He said, I think even once you're in the industry, imposter syndrome is a massive thing. And not to forget that there's a broad knowledge base and you'll never know everything. And you may have tests where you find nothing or very little. I think that's a really good point, Johnny. Any comments on that before we wrap up, Kane?
Imposter syndrome is 100% real. It's continuous for most folks in our industry. And I think acknowledging it, giving it, some space in your head, and then talking yourself or finding if you need to, talk to a professional about that, do that, right? Because this comes to humility, right? We're not always going to be the smartest person. Not everything is going to always go our way. And that can really drive imposter syndrome. We need to, as professionals, work through that to continue progressing in our careers.
Yeah, absolutely. Kane, it's been an absolute pleasure. We've run over time. I'm sure you've got lots of work to do. Everyone who's watched, a massive thank you. I think it's been one of the busiest chats we've had, and it's been thoroughly enjoyable. Big thanks again to our sponsor, Bramfit Technology Labs, who without your financial and emotional support the last few weeks, this would definitely not be possible. Kane, a massive thank you to you for coming on, sharing your insight and your journey. It's been absolutely wonderful. And I hope maybe one day we'll see you in the InfoSec Live community as well. For those watching, we do run weekly Meet the Member events, going back to all these things about networking and the importance of getting to know industry peers and colleagues. We run every Saturday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, 8 p.m. British Summer Time. We hold an impromptu meeting where we all get together, chat about industry stuff, non-industry stuff, and just try and, I suppose, create new friendships and alliances, which is awesome. So I'm going to play us out with a quick stinger from the sponsor, followed by a please like and subscribe if you enjoy the content. Everyone, it's been amazing. Kane, thank you so much.
Thank you, Simon.